Rick Pitino is back, and the Big East has an argument for the best college basketball conference in the country. Folks, get out your neon. It is the 1980s all over again.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey folks, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, Isaac, we are continuing our conference preview series, folks. We're discussing every single college basketball conference in the country between now and the start of the 23-24 college basketball season. Some of them are only getting a couple segments. Some of them are getting a whole show. And today is our third full show dedicated to the Big East Conference. We talked about the ACC. We talked about the SEC. We'll have links to those conference previews. You can also check out the show on YouTube, where we have a playlist of every single conference preview that we have done up to this point. But Isaac, I'm really excited to talk about the Big East because it's not actually the 1980s anymore. Even though Top Gun was a top movie in, very recently in the theaters, I know there's a lot of 80s stuff coming back, and Rick Pitino joining the Big East, it does kind of make it feel like it, but I'm not quite sure the Big East is as dominant as it truly was when they had 3 out of the 4 teams in the Final Four in like 1986, and when Villanova and Seton Hall were in national championship games. But man, considering that this conference was considered dead in the water about a decade ago, it has been a tremendous run for the Big East Conference in the last couple of years.
What a resurgence it's been, Andy. I'm right with you. Like, I think back to that 6 overtime game in the Big East. Was that the semifinals, the finals?
Yeah.
Oh, man, just phenomenal basketball. And then so many of them went off to the ACC, and there was UConn going off to AAC. But, man, the Big East is working its way back. And Andy, yes, I'm with you. I don't think we're back to being like the 30 for 30 version of the Big East yet, which if you haven't seen that documentary, folks, make sure you go see it. But we're at the point now where we have like 11 teams in the Big East. I love it because it's one of the few conferences left where we get a true round robin, home and home in conference play. So I think it makes the regular season champion mean so much more. Yeah. But man, as we look at it this year, we're at a point where the top 3 teams that you and I expect are legit national champion level teams. The top 5, 6 or so should be really, really good. And there's teams that are in the bottom half working their way back. And so, Andy, I mean, from the coaching standpoint, which we'll look at here in just a second, to bringing back a ton of talent. I know we lose guys like Sonogo and some others, but Andy, right? Like, as you look at the all Big East teams from last year, a bunch of them are back, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, looking team by team, Marquette's got 4 of their 5 starters coming back. I think Creighton's got 3 of their 5 coming back. Like, UConn's got a handful of guys back. And, like you said, first team, 3 guys from the first team are back. Kolek for Marquette, Kalkbrenner at Creighton, Bryce Hopkins at Providence. 4 of the 5 guys who are on the second team are back. Iguodaro for Marquette, as well as Cam Jones at Marquette. Joel Soriano is basically the only returner for St. John's, but what a guy for Pitino to keep around. Eric Dixon from Villanova's back. 3 of the 4 honorable mentions are back. Trey Alexander and Baylor Shireman at Creighton. Really nice 2 guys to have back for Coach McDermott. Devin Carter at Providence is back as well. And heck, even 4 of the 6 freshmen, and you don't always see that. Of course, a handful of those freshmen did go on into the NBA. I know Cam Whitmore was one of them, but you get Donovan Clingan and Alex Caravan back for UConn, a team that won the national championship on the back of a couple of freshmen, and those guys come back. That's huge. Yeah, to have that for them. Mark Armstrong's back at Nova. And I know my guy in Leaf Tulane and I talked about Desmond Claude being a potential breakout candidate for Xavier. He's probably going to step into that Colby Jones role for Sean Miller. And just to have that amount of talent back. And, you're not even talking about Justin Moore. You're not even talking about the newcomers, the Stephen Ashworth, the Jordan Dingles, the Cam Spencers. Like, this is a conference that is just absolutely loaded top to bottom with talent. And it's there are 3 teams at the top, as we've kind of talked about, but it is the talent in this conference is pretty spread out. Like there are a few kind of bottom feeders, but for the most part, this is a conference that, you're not going to get a lot of gimme weeks in the Big East. You're going to be playing a tough team pretty much every single week. There's a lot of tremendous talent in this league.
That's a good word. Not only is it the returners, but man, like when we were processing through who to pick for transfer of the year, Andy, I had like 7 dudes on my list that I was legitimately considering. Like it's that good. And the other freshman of the year that's gone is AJ Storr, one of those St. John's guys that's gone off. He's now playing in the Big Ten for Wisconsin. But Andy, in the same way that we got a lot of good talent in the players, you mentioned Rick Pitino already. There's a lot of coaching changes and things that I think are really good for the conference. In terms of actual changes, there are 3. Obviously, the big one is an intra-conference coaching change. Ed Cooley leaving Providence, heading to Georgetown, hoping to resurrect that proud Hoyas program. I know personally, just as a college basketball junkie, I want to see that happen, man. But also that means, and consequently, Providence needs a new coach. So they go get Kim English, who was coach at George Mason, had played at Mizzou as a player. And then in any other year, Andy, I think that the Cooley move, is the clear and runaway headline in the coaching carousel. But dude, it's got to be Rick Pitino. Like that's the biggest news. Rick Pitino in New York at St. John's. I mean, that is clearly the biggest news of this coaching carousel.
Cooley moving to Georgetown was the first time a Big East coach has taken another job directly into the Big East in the entire history of the conference. 40 plus
I hadn't
years.
Seen that. Man,
that's the first time that has ever happened. And I agree with you. It's the second biggest Big East coaching news of the cycle, which is insane. The Rick Pitino, Hall of Famer, love him or hate him, very controversial figure in college basketball, but no doubt a critical figure in the history of college basketball, working his way back, coaching at Iona, doing a good job with that team, now getting the job at St. John's, a different Big East school than where he's coached previously in New York. It's an incredible story. I talked about this before we went on air. Like there are some similarities to what's going on with Deion Sanders in Colorado, like the biggest sports story on the planet as we're recording this right now, of like a high profile coach taking over a program and turning over the roster in a significant way. I mean, Deion brought in 50 something new players. Pitino basically brought in, I think they have 2 returnees. It's Joel Soriano and I forget the other returnee, but basically an entire new roster. And are they going to have the same level of success? I don't know, but it's going to have a whole heck of a lot of eyeballs on it. That's for sure.
A whole heck of a lot of eyeballs. and Andy, what's crazy to realize, I don't think I had put this together until I was looking at this in terms of like tenure for the head coaches of the 11 Big East teams. Greg McDermott at Creighton is the longest tenured of the whole group. He's been at Creighton since 2010. And then Dan Hurley has now been Dan Hurley is the second longest tenured coach in the Big East, and he's only been there since 2018 because of like Greg McDermott, Dan Hurley. The other 9 coaches are in their 3rd year or fewer at their school. And it's crazy to think about that in terms of like, man, we got all this talent, all these what we think are going to be really, really good teams, but coaches who are kind of just getting into the Big East waters, as it were. Not to mention, I think part of maybe why we don't realize this as quickly is because we have 2 coaches back for their second stint at their schools. That's Sean Miller, who was at Xavier from 04 to 09, came back last year, and so was in year 2 back at X, and then Thad Matta at Butler, who was there just 1 year, 2000 and 2001. And then, of course, he was the one that preceded Sean Miller at Xavier before going to Ohio State, and also came back last year. So, Andy, I know we're fresh on a lot of coaches, but man, like just when you hear the names themselves, like Thad Matta, Sean Miller, Rick Pitino, it's big, massive college basketball names.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think, to piggyback off of why it doesn't feel like as many new coaches, Cooley certainly factors into that as well.
Absolutely.
As new coach at Georgetown, but certainly not a new coach to the Big East. Same with with Pitino, but it is a really dominant, stacked group of coaches in the Big East. I think I would put this group of coaches up against any conference in college basketball, and it's really hard to ignore this success that these teams have had. You get Shaka Smart, of course, we talked about McDermott and those guys, and I think, looking at the hot seat and looking at, I don't think there's a lot of coaches I don't think we're going to see a lot more turnover. I think we saw a lot of it just kind of happen there. Patrick Ewing is gone. He's not at Georgetown anymore. That was kind of the big storyline, was how long is Ewing going to last? And, I think we'll see with Thad Matta, like, how long is he going to stick it out at Butler? I don't know how quickly they'll fire him, but I don't know how long he'll last. Tony Stubblefield at DePaul is kind of an interesting one as well. I think the leash is going to be a little longer for him. Of course, Neptune and Holloway haven't gotten enough time to really get going at Nova and Seton Hall respectively, but I think that this group of 11 is probably going to stick for at least another maybe couple of years before we see any changes in the Big East.
Boy, I would sure hope so. Just love to see consistency. One guy who we probably, unfortunately, won't see this year is Zach Freemantle. We talked about all this talent. Sounds like he is going to miss probably the whole year for Xavier. I haven't seen anything like immediate right as we're recording this. So obviously, as we're thinking about all this talent, our thoughts go out to him who, just those struggles, and you hate to see it. But Andy, we do want to talk about who we think is going to rule the roost of the Big East this year. Who are those three teams that we've been talking about? Who are some other teams that could rise up and challenge them? And, maybe who might not quite be there yet this year? We're going to get to all of that conversation, declaring our conference champs, in just a second. But first, let me tell you that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You ever have trouble shutting off your brain when you fall asleep? I know I do. I lay down and my mind's running through everything that's just happened and getting ready for the next day. And here's the truth. Talking through those thoughts is a great way to help them clear out and go away. Therapy can give you a place for that, the opportunity to find some mental and emotional peace to shut those thoughts out. Therapy with BetterHelp is helpful for learning positive coping skills and setting boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for people who have experienced major trauma in their lives, like we so often think about. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, let me encourage you to give BetterHelp a try. It's completely online, which is so helpful if you have a crazy schedule like we do, trying to record podcasts, write, do all this other stuff. Man, I love it because it's designed to be convenient and flexible for a crazy schedule. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. Andy, speaking of Locked On college football, man, we're just finished weekend 3. We're moving towards week 4. I know we got a massive game coming up this week with Ohio State and Notre Dame, and the folks at Locked On College Football Kickoff Live are going to get you ready for that on Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube page. Folks, make sure you don't miss it this Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern. All right, Andy, let's get right back into this Big East conversation. We've looked at some of the major storylines, man, the talent, the coaches, all of it boils down to then thinking about maybe who are some of the favorites in this conference this year? Who are some maybe dark horse picks or like unlikely? We'll have conversation about that. And then ultimately, let's land on who are our picks for regular season and Big East Conference tournament champion. Andy, talk to us about these favorites.
It's funny. We talked about how deep this conference is and how much the talent is spread out. And I firmly believe that. But there are 3 teams that in my mind are going to be really, really hard to beat in the regular season and in that conference tournament for the Big East. I would never say never. It's definitely possible that one of the other 8 teams in this conference somehow sneaks in, especially in that Big East tournament where kind of anything goes when you're in the Madison Square Garden. But to me, man, Marquette, Creighton, and UConn. UConn, of course, the defending national champs. They lose a lot of talent. Hawkins out the door, Sonogo out the door. But to keep Donovan Clingan, to keep Tristan Newton, to bring in some of the talent that they brought in from the freshman class and the portal class, I mean, it's really hard to ignore a team that that kept a lot of talent that also won the dang national championship.
Yeah.
Marquette returns 4 of their 5 starters. Omax Prosper is a tough loss for them, but Shaka Smart has done a fantastic job, especially offensively with that group. Tyler Kolek is elite point guard, one of the best in the entire country. And then you have Creighton, and Creighton, of course, they lose their starting point guard, Ryan Nemhard, somewhat surprisingly enters the transfer portal, goes to Gonzaga, but they add Stephen Ashworth from Utah State. Ryan Kalkbrenner is a legitimate candidate for player of the year. Baylor Shireman looked excellent last year. He should be great again. Trey Alexander is back. And to me, those 3 teams are a step ahead in the sense that there's going to be multiple teams ranked in the Big East. There's going to be multiple teams with probably top 5 seeds in the Big East, but those 3 teams have a real shot of being top 5 teams for huge chunks of the 23-24 season and could all contend to be 1 or 2 seeds in the Big Dance this year.
Yeah. I mean, what else do we need to say? It's those 3. The only team that I could see that might jump up and get them is DePaul. I'm just kidding. Apologies to all the DePaul fans out there, but
the city of Chicago is going to hate us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm coming to Chicago in December. You all can find me there, and we'll have words. Andy, I got no disagreements, no changes. I'm right with you on Creighton, UConn, and Marquette. I think those are the clear 3 front runners. In terms of dark horses, it's funny to put this team in this category, but Villanova, I think, is a clear. I'm calling them a dark horse, and here's why. I know, like, you get back Justin Moore, you got just so much talent there. You got a guy like Eric Dixon that I think will be, probably first or second team all Big East. Maybe I have him on my team. We'll find out soon. But I think my hesitation with putting them a little higher up is just I'm waiting to see what we got with Kyle Neptune, right? And it's kind of the reverse with St. John's. I feel like Rick Pitino can do anything, but you wait to see how this whole jumbled together roster will gel and what they'll be able to do. But I have kind of those 2 teams as if anyone's going to jump up and join those top 3, I think to me, those might be the next best 2.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Nova, I think I love the additions of Hakeem Hart. I love TJ Bamba coming in from the transfer portal. Lance Ware from Kentucky. Be interested to see what he looks like. But yeah, we got to see what Neptune can do in year 2. And it's not that I have a lack of confidence in him. It's just more of like, let's see what it looks like with a full year of health, with, getting some of your guys in. And again, 4th in this conference is pretty darn good considering the top 3 teams we all expect to be potential top 10 teams. And I got St. John's in that conversation as well, like you said. And I would kind of cautiously toss Xavier into that mix as well. No Zach Fremantle is a really tough blow for Sean Miller's squad, but they return some other key talent. I think Desmond Claude steps into a bigger role for this team, and I'm interested to see what the transfers they got. Quincy Oliveri coming over from Rice. They got Davion McKnight from Western Kentucky, 2 guys who kind of remind me a little bit of Sule Boom, who was, of course, excellent for them last year. And they both can't be Sule Boom because Boom was a ball-dominant guard, and that's kind of what Sean Miller loves. So one of those guys is going to take on that ball-dominant role. How the other player adjusts to being more off the ball will be an interesting dynamic. Are they going to be in the top 3? I would guess probably not. But if those veteran transfer guards mesh really well together, they're not a team I would want to face in the Big East tournament.
No, agreed with that. And one of the hard things with replacing Fremantle is last year you had Jack Nungy hanging around, right? Yeah. And there's not that this year. And so I think a big part of the reason we call these guys dark horses instead of tier 2 is just because of that stranglehold we think those top 3 teams have. Speaking of which, Andy, I would imagine then as we get to our champions, both regular season and conference tournament, we're going to hear a nice smattering of Marquette, Creighton, and or Marquette. So let's start with you with your regular season champ.
I'm going to give you both right now, and then I'm just going to let you take your 2 teams. I got Marquette for both. I'm going Marquette for regular season championship. I'm going Marquette for conference tournament championship. I think Marquette, again, we've talked about this a handful of times on the show. Do we potentially overrate continuity when talking about college basketball? And we've had that discussion. And yet most of the time we do talk a lot about how important continuity is. And for me, Marquette having 4 or 5 starters return, and we talk a lot about veteran guards. And there's a lot of great veteran guards in the Big East on some of these other teams. Creighton has them and UConn has them. But Kolek is such an elite distributor. He's an elite passer. He's a very gifted scorer. And I think getting him back with Cam Cam Jones, with the rest of that team, with Shaka Smart. We'll see what improvements they can make defensively, especially after losing Prosper. But to me, this is a team that I think is going to win the regular season, and I have a hard time betting against them in that conference tournament because of that experience, because of that veteran guard play that they have.
Yeah, Kolek, man, he's a dude for sure. Andy, here's my thing. I'm kind of with you on the returning and what all that means. But wow, how crazy would it be if Marquette did that back-to-back, both championships? Wild to think about. I actually, hand up, think that Marquette's going to take a little bit of a step back, not major, but I actually have them third of these three teams this year. I don't know what it is. Just call it college basketball commentators' intuition. We'll see. I have Creighton winning the regular season championship. I think the pieces that they return that we've talked about, sliding in Stephen Ashworth into that role vacated by Ryan Nembhard, I think that's going to be able to get the job done. And I think Coach McDermott is so good. And so I have Creighton winning that true regular season championship, again, with the full home and home for all schools. I like that. And then give me UConn to win the conference tournament. I think by the time we get to that point, it's just they'll have brought it back together. The experience that we just talked about with Marquette, I think UConn brings back from what they did last year in the postseason. I don't think we get that same lull from them that we did like January last year. I think they're the team that we saw on the front end and the back end. I think we're going to get more of that, but then they really just put it together in the conference tournament. So Andy has Marquette winning both regular season and conference tournament. I got Creighton winning the regular season and UConn bringing home that automatic qualifying bid.
Well, Isaac, I know we had some hard times trying to figure out who we were going to put on this All Big East first team, as well as some of those Player of the Year awards. A lot of really, really good candidates, and we're going to discuss who we have winning those awards and why. But first, this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Athletic Brewing, and now is the time for your game changer of the week. Once again, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company, much like Shedeur Sanders, who led the University of Colorado to a comeback victory over in-state rival Colorado State on Saturday night. Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. They're full of flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy them online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first-time order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions do apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Folks, welcome back. Still talking Big East basketball, an extremely exciting conference season coming up for this conference in 2023-24. And we talked about our regular season winners, talked about our conference tournament winners, but now we want to take a look at some of those award predictions, taking a look at our 5-team, first team all conferences. We'll also look at player of the year, coach of the year, transfer of the year, and newcomer of the year as well. And freshman of the year, freshman and newcomer of the year. And Isaac, like you said, a lot of tough decisions to make here, narrowing it down to 5 guys for that first team. Really big challenge. Who did you have on that list?
The entire, I'm going to say the entire conference. Andy, here is my first team. Got to go with Tyler Kolek. Keep him up there. I mean, duh, right? Yeah. And then Tristan Newton at UConn. I see him playing a very similar role to Kolek. I think he steps in where some of the guys left and really takes a massive step forward for the Huskies. Give me Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton. Hello. Duh. Yeah, right. And then for number 4 for me, I've got Joel Soriano from St. John's. I know with bringing all these guys in, he's, as you referenced earlier, the consistent guy that's still there. That I just think they lean on his experience. And so I just see that happening. And then I need somebody from Villanova. And I think Eric Dixon is going to be perhaps their best player this year. Somebody's got to be. I think it's going to be Eric Dixon. As you said, I had such a tough time. I got literally 8 other dudes I could put on this list and feel good about it. What about you?
3 of the 5, I had the same with you. I think Tyler Kolek and Ryan Kalkbrenner are the more obvious candidates. I think Kolek, of course, talked about him being the point guard for Marquette, a team I'm expecting to win it all if that's the case, or at least win the conference. If that's the case, hard to ignore him. He also won the award last year. Kalkbrenner, real chance of being Big East Player of the Year this year as well. I also have Eric Dixon from Villanova. I think kind of the same reasoning for you, veteran guy. I think he's going to have a really valuable role for Kyle Neptune's team. And then I have 2 differences. Although from the same 2 teams as you, coincidentally, you had Tristan Newton at UConn, but I'm going with Donovan Clingan. It'll be really interesting to see if Clingan can live up to the hype that he has been getting, since he was a true freshman last year, as that kind of backup to Adama Sanogo. What does he look like stepping into a bigger role? Zach Edey was a guy who was like, is he going to keep up that production when his minutes per game go up? And he did. Can Clingan do the same thing? It's a really kind of fascinating storyline.
Yes is the answer.
Probably so, if in which case he's going to be on this list, no doubt. And then I'm going with the newcomer at St. John's, the only newcomer on this list, Jordan Dingle, a guy who averaged 23.5 points per game for Penn last year. I think there's a real chance that he gets an opportunity to put up some big scoring numbers for Rick Pitino in that offense. And if St. John's takes a big leap, I think there's a real chance that he ends up sneaking onto this list.
Oh, man, that's so hard, Andy. Legitimately, it's going to be fun to watch that race this year. Okay, let's move to Player of the Year. Andy, who are you going with there?
I'm going with Kolek. I know it's boring. He was the guy last year, but if I'm projecting Marquette to win the conference regular season and to win the tournament, it's got to be somebody from Marquette. There's just no way that they wouldn't give that award to somebody, and it's going to be Kolek if that's the case. A prolific passer, prolific scorer, like we said, and there are a lot of great candidates here, and I think there are plenty of guys who could win this award for the first time, but give me Kolek right now.
Yeah, it's hard to bet against that if everything happens like you said. I was debating between 2 guys, Ryan Kalkbrenner at Creighton, whom I didn't pick, but I think, like you said a minute ago, is a very possible candidate to take this trophy home. I'm actually going with the leading scorer from the national championship game. Give me Tristan Newton from UConn. Andy, 19 points in the national championship, tied for the most rebounds in the game with Adama Sanogo, a double-double for this 6'5" point guard. Dude, he's going to have the ball a ton. He's going to play a ton. He's got the size at 6'5", 195, the experience as a fifth-year guy. I know he's criticized for not being a true point guard, whatever. He had 4.7 assists per game last year. Come on. 10.5 points, 4.5 boards, 1.1 steals, shot 36.6% from 3, 81.6% from the free throw line. Pretty real, as you compare his year to Tyler Kolek's from last year, the numbers are very, very similar. So massive usage rate, although slightly capped, I think, by Donovan Clingan's capability, sure. But man, I think Tristan Newton just steps into a lot of what's vacated from guys that left after last year. I got Tristan Newton bringing it home.
I like it. I do. I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say hate for Newton, but I do think that he's a bit underappreciated, and I think it'll be interesting to see what he looks like stepping into that role. Isaac, Coach of the Year. I know you've talked about how it's often given to coaches who maybe elevate their team from lower in the standings to the middle of the standings, and some criticism on that. With this, an unbelievably loaded group of coaches, who do you got taking home this trophy next year?
I think we could probably say it together, Andy, because rising from the ashes like a phoenix, coming over from the Iona Gales, Rick Pitino coming home. It's just meant to be, Andy. I don't think we have to overthink this thing.
No, I'm going with Pitino as well. A new roster, unless this completely blows up in his face, which I just don't think is going to happen. Then yeah, I think Pitino's going to be taking home this trophy.
Oh.
Looking ahead, transfer of the year. Isaac, want to know who you got here again? I had a list of 10 or so that I could have picked from, and you could have closed your eyes and drawn one, and I would have been able to make an argument for him.
100%, which I love. It's just, I just keep getting more excited about the Big East. I actually went with Stephen Ashworth, who is coming over from Utah State to Creighton. And here's why I think he slides in, as I said earlier, right where Ryan Nembhard left, and has guys like Trey Alexander around him, Baylor Shireman, Ryan Kalkbrenner. You don't have to do much to succeed with those dudes on the court with you. And yet last year at Utah State, 16.2 points, 4.5 assists, 3.3 rebounds, over a steal, and he shot 43.4% from 3 on 7 attempts a game, Andy. I just see Stephen Ashworth playing a huge role for Greg McDermott's team this year. I love this pick. It took me a while to get there, but once I landed on it, I was like, yes.
Ashworth was probably my second choice here. I didn't end up going with him. I did go with Jordan Dingle, which of course, if I'm going to pick Dingle for the first team, I got to pick him as that transfer of the year. And a lot of the same arguments that you made for Ashworth kind of apply to Dingle. He was a highly efficient scorer, even in like a really high volume role. And he won't have as high volume of a role with St. John's because of Soriano, because of Dennis Jenkins, because of some of the other guys that got coming in. But Pitino's a great coach. He coaches guards extremely well. And while I don't know that Dingle's not going to score 23.5 points per game again, I think he's going to be a really productive scorer with some decent efficiency numbers. They might even tick up going from Penn to St. John's. And I think that's enough for him to be the guy who takes home this trophy.
All right, Andy, let's just blow by our last stuff here. Sixth man of the year. I'm going with whoever's the odd man out for Villanova. I think it's either going to be Mark Armstrong or TJ Bamba. I just see like 6 guys that I think could all start for Nova. I'm actually going to go with Bamba. I don't know why, because I've been thinking he'd be a starter, but give me Bamba over Armstrong for sixth man of the year.
I'm going with a Big East to Big East transfer in Naheem Aline coming over to St. John's from UConn, a guy who spent 3 years at Virginia Tech prior to that. Was a more of a scorer at Virginia Tech than he ended up being at UConn last year. But I think if he can shoot the rock a little bit better for Pitino than he did last year with UConn, I think he could be a guy who steps into a role behind Dennis Jenkins, behind Jordan Dingle, and puts up enough production to be that guy for St. John's.
Dark horse, watch out for Samson Johnson, also at UConn, backing up Mr. Potential Foul Trouble in Donovan Clingan.
There you go.
Andy, let's get out of here on this. Over under 6.5 Big East teams in this year's NCAA tournament.
I'm going with 7, so I'm going just over. And I think there's 7 fairly comfortably in the field. Marquette, UConn, Creighton, no mysteries there.
That's like top 4 teams, top 4 seeds.
Yep. Right. I mean, realistically, I think Xavier and Nova are both in as well. Xavier is in a bit more of a precarious spot with their team, like we said, but I think they're in. I think St. John's gets in. I think Pitino's got enough talent on that team and enough coaching acumen to get them in. I think Providence sneaks in with Kim English. I think they managed to keep a lot of the talent together, which people weren't expecting them to do. Got some fun newcomers coming in as well. So those are the 7 that I think are coming in. And frankly, the other 4 schools, with no disrespect to Seton Hall or Georgetown or DePaul or Butler, I don't see those teams getting in, but I do think we get 7 out of this conference.
Well, with apologies to those 4 schools, you and I are completely aligned on everything you just said. So we'll leave it there, and we'll leave the show there today. Thank you, folks, so much for joining in to start a brand new week. Great to chat Big East stuff. We got more conference previews coming up this week. Make sure you check in on the show, and we'll start next Monday with another full show conference preview. So, folks, for Andy Patton, I'm Isaac Shade. Make sure to follow my man on Twitter at Andy Patton CBB. You can follow me at Isaac Shade or follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnCBB. Don't forget to subscribe on audio and video platforms. Smash the like button, and would love your comments on what you think is going to happen in the Big East this year. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Boy, I can't wait for that Big Ten preview. Hey, let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.